This is HOA Control Freaks. She threatened towing like it was punctuation. I am here to protect the community. That was the first thing Diane Parker said to me, standing in my assigned parking spot with her arms crossed and a stack of pre-filled violation forms with boxes already checked clutched against her chest. She yelled that I was trespassing in my own parking spot and that the HOA had jurisdiction now. I work as a warehouse forklift lead, and I cannot miss overtime, so I had maybe 3 minutes to figure out what she was talking about before my shift started. She pointed at a cone she had placed behind my bumper and said the space was now flagged for enforcement review. I asked her what that meant. She said it meant I could not park there until the Brookhaven Greens Village Association Rules Enforcement Committee cleared me. I lived in Allentown, Pennsylvania, in a neighborhood where normal life becomes a parking violation, and Diane was the rules enforcement chair who loved warning letters. She said my guest had been parking in visitor spots without a valid decal, and that my household was now under a parking audit. I did not have a guest. I told her that. She tapped the clipboard and said her records showed otherwise. I asked to see the records. She said I could request them through the portal, but the portal was down for maintenance, and until it came back up, all enforcement actions were considered valid by default. She smiled when she said that. I looked at my phone. I had 2 minutes before I had to leave or risk a write-up at work. I asked her to move the cone. She said no. She said if I moved it myself, that would be tampering with HOA property, and she would add it to my file. I moved the cone. I got in my car and backed out. She took a photo of me doing it. She said that photo was now evidence of a violation. I drove to work with my hands shaking on the wheel. My elderly parent was staying with me for a few weeks while recovering from a minor surgery, and the stress was making everything harder. I had been picking up extra shifts to cover the medical bills, and every time I left the house, I worried about what Diane would do next. When I got home that night, there was a violation notice taped to my front door. It said I had parked in an unauthorized guest space during a restricted window, and that I owed a $50 administrative processing fee. The notice included a photo, but the photo was not my car. The plate was wrong. The color was wrong. The photo was clearly recycled from some other violation, maybe months old, but the date stamp on the notice said it had been taken that afternoon. I called the HOA management company the next morning. The woman on the phone said Diane had submitted the violation through the committee portal and that it had been automatically processed. I explained that the photo was not my car. She said I could appeal, but appeals had to go through the portal, and the portal was still down. I asked when it would be back up. She said she did not know. I asked if I could email my appeal directly. She said no, the system only accepted portal submissions. I asked if I could mail a paper appeal. She said the mailing address was only for payments, not disputes. I felt my chest tighten. I asked how I was supposed to dispute a fake charge if the system was down. She said the system was rarely down for more than a few days, and once it was back up, I would have 7 business days to file. I asked what happened if I did not pay before then. She said the fee would double after 14 days and go to collections after 30. I hung up and stared at the notice. The stack of pre-filled violation forms with boxes already checked kept showing up in my mind. Diane had a system. She was not making mistakes. She was creating violations on purpose, and the management company was rubber stamping them because nobody checked. That weekend, my parent asked why I kept looking out the window. I said I was just keeping an eye on things. The truth was I was watching for Diane. She had been walking the parking lot every evening with a flashlight and that clipboard, writing down plate numbers and peeling guest passes off windshields to check the dates. She had helpers now, 2 other residents in bright yellow vests with reflective tape, and they moved through the rows like they were running a checkpoint. One of them had a handheld scanner, the kind you see at airport security, and he was scanning every decal and guest pass like he was checking boarding tickets. I went outside and asked what they were doing. The man with the scanner said they were conducting a compliance sweep. I asked under what authority. He said the Rules Enforcement Committee had been granted emergency powers to address a pattern of violations. I asked what pattern. He did not answer. Diane walked up behind him and said the board had voted to expand enforcement after multiple complaints about unauthorized parking. I asked when the vote happened. She said it was at the last board meeting. I said I never got notice of a board meeting. She said notices were posted on the website and in the clubhouse, and if I did not check those, That was my problem. She looked at my car and said I was missing a current year resident decal. I said I had one. She said she did not see it. I pointed at the windshield. There was a decal right there, clearly visible, with the HOA logo and the year printed on it. She leaned in close with her flashlight and said it was placed incorrectly. I asked how a decal could be placed incorrectly. She said it had to be in the lower left corner of the windshield, and mine was in the lower right. I said the instruction sheet that came with the decal said either corner was fine. She said the instruction sheet was outdated and that the new rules required left corner only. She pulled out a pre-filled violation form, checked a box, and said I had 72 hours to correct the placement or my vehicle would be subject to towing. I swallowed my anger, because I knew the moment to use it was coming. That night I started digging. I went on the HOA website and found the board meeting minutes. The most recent meeting had been 2 months ago, and there was no mention of any vote to expand enforcement or grant emergency powers. I downloaded the minutes and saved them. I searched for the rules about decal placement. The official rules document, the one hosted on the management company's site, said decals could be placed in either lower corner of the windshield. I screenshotted the page and saved it. I checked my own payment history. I had paid my dues on time every quarter for the last 2 years. I had receipts. I made a folder on my desktop and started dumping everything into it. The next morning I moved my decal to the left corner. I took a photo of it with a timestamp. I went to work. When I got home, there was another notice on my door. This one said my guest had been parking in a fire lane and that the fire marshal had been notified. I did not have a guest. I had not had a guest park at my place in weeks. I went outside and looked at the spot they were talking about. It was not a fire lane. There was no curb paint, no signage, nothing. It was just a regular parking space at the end of a row. I took photos of the curb, the pavement, the surrounding area. No red paint, no fire lane markings anywhere. I called the fire marshal's office. The man who answered said they had not received any complaints from Brookhaven Greens in over a year. I asked if they had any record of a fire lane violation at my address. He checked. He said no. I thanked him and hung up. Diane had lied. She had made up a fire lane, reported a fake violation, and sent me a notice with a threat that she knew was false. I printed the call log from my phone showing the fire marshal conversation. I added it to the folder. The portal came back online 3 days later. I logged in and filed my appeal. I attached the photos, the receipts, the rules document, the minutes, and the fire marshal confirmation. I wrote a 2-page explanation. I hit submit. The system said my appeal had been received and that I would get a response within 10 business days. I got a response in 2 days. It said my appeal had been reviewed and denied. It said the committee had determined that the violations were valid and that the fees would remain in place. It said I could request a hearing, but hearings required a $50 deposit, and the deposit was non-refundable even if I won. I stared at the screen. They wanted me to pay $50 just for the chance to argue. I paid it. I requested a hearing. The system said the next available date was in 3 weeks. 3 weeks. My parent was still recovering. I was still working overtime. Diane was still walking the lot every night with her clipboard and her helpers in vests. The stack of pre-filled violation forms with boxes already checked kept growing. I saw her hand them out to the vest crew like she was dealing cards. Every night another car got flagged. Every morning another notice went up on another door. A neighbor knocked on my door one evening. She said she had gotten 5 violation notices in the last 2 weeks and that her car had been booted twice. She said she could not afford to keep paying the fees, and she was thinking about selling and moving out. She asked if I knew a lawyer. I said I was looking into it. She said good, because somebody needed to stop Diane before the whole neighborhood went broke. I started asking around. I found out that Diane had been targeting specific households, mine included, for months. The common thread was that we all had guests who visited regularly, or we parked in spots that she wanted kept open for some reason she never explained. One guy said Diane had told him his contractor could not park in the visitor lot during the day because visitor spots were for evening use only. He said that rule was not in the handbook. She said it was a new rule. He asked where it was written down. She said it was in the committee notes, and committee notes were not public. I reached out to a city code enforcement officer I knew from a volunteer gig years ago. His name was Mark. I explained what was happening. He said it sounded like the HOA was making up rules as they went, and that was technically allowed as long as the rules did not conflict with city code or state law. I asked if fake fire lanes were allowed. He said absolutely not. I sent him the photos. He said he would swing by and take a look. Mark showed up 2 days later in his city truck. He walked the parking lot with a clipboard of his own. He took measurements. He checked the curb. He checked the signage. Diane saw him and came running over. She asked what he was doing. He said he was responding to a complaint about an improperly marked fire lane. She said the fire lane was clearly marked. He said he did not see any markings. She pointed at a row of spaces near the clubhouse and said those were the fire lane. He said they were not. He said fire lanes had to meet specific width and clearance requirements, they had to be painted red, and they had to have posted signage. None of that was present. She said the HOA had designated those spaces as fire lanes in an internal memo. He said internal memos do not create fire lanes. He said if she kept claiming those spaces were fire lanes, she was making false reports, and that could be a problem. She turned red. She said the committee had the authority to designate enforcement zones. Mark said the committee did not have the authority to invent city code violations. He handed her a notice saying the alleged fire lane did not meet code, and that any towing or booting based on that claim could result in fines against the HOA. She took the notice and walked away without another word. I thanked Mark. He said to let him know if she kept it up. He said HOAs got away with a lot, but they could not make up laws. That night I got a text from the management company. It said my hearing had been moved up to the following week. It said the committee wanted to resolve the matter quickly. I knew what that meant. Diane was angry, and she was going to try to bury me before I could fight back. I called the neighbor who had asked about a lawyer. I asked if she wanted to go to the hearing with me as a witness. She said yes. I called 2 other neighbors who had been hit with bogus violations. They both said yes. I made a list of everyone who had been targeted. I printed photos of the fake fire lane, the recycled violation photos, the mismatched dates, the rule contradictions. I put it all in a binder. I labeled it evidence. I practiced what I was going to say. I did not sleep much that week. The hearing was scheduled for a Saturday morning in the clubhouse. I showed up 15 minutes early. The room was small, just a folding table and a few chairs. Diane was already there with 2 other board members, both older men who looked like they had been pulled out of a golf game. One of them introduced himself as the board president. He said they were going to keep this informal. He said I would have 10 minutes to present my case, and then they would make a decision. I opened the binder. I started with the recycled photo. I showed them the violation notice with the wrong car and the wrong plate. I showed them my car and the actual plate number. The president frowned. Diane said the photo must have been attached to the wrong account by mistake, but the underlying violation was still valid. I asked what underlying violation. She said I had parked in a guest spot during a restricted window. I pulled out the rules document. I read the section on guest parking. There was no restricted window. Guest spots were available any time. Diane said the restricted window was in the committee guidelines. I asked to see the committee guidelines. She said they were not public. The president cleared his throat. He said committee guidelines had to be made available to homeowners on request. Diane said the guidelines were still being finalized. I said that meant they did not exist. She did not answer. I moved to the fire lane issue. I showed them the photos of the unmarked curb. I showed them the notice from Mark, the code enforcement officer, confirming that no fire lane existed. The president read the notice. He looked at Diane. He asked if she had verified the fire lane before issuing the violation. She said the fire lane had been discussed at a committee meeting. He asked if it had been marked. She said marking was in progress. I said there was no marking, no paint, no signs, nothing, and that the fire marshal had no record of any complaint. Diane said I was twisting the facts. I pulled out the meeting minutes. I showed them that no vote on enforcement expansion had been recorded. I showed them that no emergency powers had been granted. I showed them that the rules Diane was citing did not exist in any public document. The president looked uncomfortable. He said this was a lot of information to process. He said they would need to review it and get back to me. Diane stood up. She said the committee had the authority to interpret the rules as needed to protect the community, and if I did not like it, I could run for the board myself. She said her paperwork had a letterhead, and mine was just printouts. She said that made hers official and mine irrelevant. Your paperwork is cute, mine has a letterhead. I stayed calm. I said the management company had a legal obligation to follow the recorded rules, not made-up committee interpretations. I said if the HOA was enforcing rules that did not exist, that was fraud, and I had proof. The president held up a hand. He said they would review everything and issue a decision within 5 business days. He said the hearing was over. I walked out. The neighbors who had come with me were waiting in the parking lot. One of them said I had done great. Another said Diane looked like she was about to explode. I said I did not know if it would matter. The board president seemed reasonable, but he also seemed like he did not want to fight with Diane. That night I got an email. It was from the management company. It said the board had reviewed my case and determined that the violations were valid, but that the fees would be reduced as a courtesy. It said I owed $75 total. It said payment was due in 7 days. I stared at the email. They had not addressed any of my evidence. They had not explained the fake photo or the fake fire lane or the missing vote. They had just cut the fees in half and called it a courtesy. I did not pay. I called a lawyer instead. The lawyer said HOAs were tricky. She said they had a lot of leeway to interpret their own rules, and judges usually sided with them unless there was clear evidence of bad faith or illegal conduct. I said I had clear evidence. She said clear evidence was subjective. She said if I wanted to fight it, I would need to file a complaint with the state, request a full audit of the HOA finances and records, and probably take it to court. She said that could take months and cost thousands. She asked if I had that kind of time and money. I said no. She said then my best option was to pay the reduced fees, document everything, and wait for Diane to make a bigger mistake. I hung up. I felt sick. I had proof. I had witnesses. I had a code enforcement officer backing me up, and none of it mattered because the system was rigged. If you are enjoying this wild ride, hit the like button and subscribe for more HOA horror stories where the little guy fights back and wins. 2 days later, my parent asked why I was so stressed. I tried to explain. I said the HOA was shaking me down with fake violations, and there was nothing I could do about it unless I wanted to spend a year in court. My parents said that was insane. I said it was normal for this neighborhood. My parents said I should move. I said I could not afford to move. I had just bought the place a year ago and the market was bad. I was stuck. That night I got a text. It was from a number I did not recognize. The text said I should check the neighborhood group chat. I did not know there was a neighborhood group chat. The text said to search for Brookhaven Greens residents on a messaging app. I found it. There were over 100 people in the chat. The recent messages were all about Diane. Someone had posted screenshots of violation notices. Someone else had posted photos of the enforcement crew with a handheld scanner and the vests. Someone else had posted a spreadsheet tracking how much money the HOA had collected in fees over the last 6 months. The number was over $40,000. Someone in the chat said they had filed a complaint with the state attorney general. Someone else said they had contacted a local news station. Someone else said they were organizing a recall petition to remove Diane from the board. The chat was moving fast. People were angry. I read back through the history. Diane had been running the scam for at least a year. She had targeted dozens of households. She had collected tens of thousands in bogus fees. And the management company had let her do it because they got a cut of every fee collected. I sent a message introducing myself. I said I had evidence of fake violations, fake fire lanes, and falsified meeting minutes. I said I had a code enforcement officer who could confirm the fire lane was bogus. I said I was willing to share everything I had. Within minutes, 5 people messaged me directly asking for copies. I sent them the folder. The next day, someone knocked on my door. It was a woman I had never met. She said she was organizing a meeting at her house that night for everyone who had been targeted by Diane. She said a reporter was going to be there. She asked if I would come and tell my story. I said yes. The meeting was packed. There were maybe 20 people crammed into a living room, all of them holding folders and binders like mine. The reporter was a young guy with a notebook and a recorder. He said he had been following HOA abuse stories for a while, and this one looked like a good case. He asked us to go around the room and explain what had happened to us. One by one, people told their stories. Fake violations, recycled photos, made-up rules, fees that doubled overnight, cars that got booted or towed with no warning. One woman said she had been fined for having a wreath on her door during the wrong season. Another said she had been fined for parking her own car in her own driveway, because the HOA said driveways were for garage overflow only. When it was my turn, I explained the fake fire lane, the recycled photo, the missing vote, and the hearing where Diane had said committee guidelines were not public. The reporter asked if I had documentation. I handed him my binder. He flipped through it. He said this was good. He said he would run the story. The story came out 3 days later. It was on the local news website and in the print edition. The headline was HOA Enforcement Chair Accused of Bogus Violations and Fee Schemes. The article included quotes from me, from Mark the Code Enforcement Officer, and from 4 other homeowners. It included photos of the fake fire lane, the stack of pre-filled violation forms with boxes already checked, and a chart showing the spike in fee collections over the last year. The article said the management company had declined to comment. The HOA went silent for 2 days. No new violation notices, no enforcement sweeps. Diane did not show up in the parking lot with her clipboard. The group chat exploded with speculation. Some people said the board was panicking. Some said the management company was lawyering up. Some said Diane was going to get fired. I did not say anything. I just waited. On the 3rd day, I got an email from the management company. It said the board had scheduled an emergency meeting and that all homeowners were invited. The meeting was that night. I cleared my schedule. I drove to the clubhouse. The parking lot was full. People were standing outside because there was not enough room inside. I squeezed in. The board president was at the front table. Diane was not there. The president said the board had become aware of concerns regarding the enforcement process. He said they took those concerns seriously. He said they had hired an independent firm to conduct a management audit that exposes the pattern. He said the audit would review all fee collections, all violation notices, and all committee actions over the last year. He said the results would be made public. He said in the meantime, all pending violations were frozen, and no new violations would be issued until the audit was complete. Someone in the crowd asked where Diane was. The president said Diane had stepped down from the Rules Enforcement Committee effective immediately. The room erupted. People were clapping. People were shouting questions. Someone asked if Diane would be held accountable. The president said the audit would determine that. Someone asked if we would get refunds for bogus fees. The president said that would be part of the audit findings. Someone asked if the management company would be fired. The president said the board was reviewing all vendor contracts. I did not clap. I just stood there and watched. Diane was gone. The fees were frozen. The audit was happening. It was not enough, but it was a start. The audit took 6 weeks. The results came back in a 40-page report. I got a copy in the mail. I read the whole thing. The auditors found that Diane had issued over 200 violation notices in the last year, and more than half of them were based on rules that did not exist, or photos that had been recycled. The auditors found that the management company had processed the fees without verifying the violations. The auditors found that Diane had used her committee email to coordinate with a towing company, and that the towing company had paid her a referral fee for every car towed. The auditors found that the board president had signed off on the fee increases without reviewing the underlying enforcement data. The report recommended that all fees collected under false pretenses be refunded, that the management company be terminated, and that Diane be prohibited from serving on any HOA committee in the future. The board held another meeting. They voted to accept the audit recommendations. They fired the management company. They hired an interim manager who froze all enforcement actions until new rules could be drafted and published. They voted to refund every fee that the audit had flagged as questionable. My refund check came 2 weeks later. It was for $325, covering all the fees I had been charged, plus the hearing deposit. I deposited the check. I felt lighter than I had in months. Diane did not go quietly. She tried to appeal the board decision. She sent an email to the whole neighborhood saying the audit was biased and that the board had thrown her under the bus to avoid liability. She said she had only been trying to protect property values. She said the real problem was lazy homeowners who did not follow the rules. Nobody responded. The group chat ignored her. The board ignored her. She sent another email a week later threatening to sue. Nothing happened. The lawyer I had consulted told me that Diane probably did not have a case, and even if she did, no lawyer would take it, because the evidence against her was overwhelming. A month later, the board published new parking rules. The rules were clear. Guest parking was unrestricted. Decals could be placed in either lower corner. Fire lanes had to meet city code and be clearly marked. Violation notices had to include photographic evidence with matching plates and timestamps. Appeals could be filed by email or mail, and the board had to respond within 10 business days. The rules were posted on the website, mailed to every household, and printed on laminated cards distributed at the clubhouse. The new interim manager sent an email saying enforcement would resume in 30 days, but only under the new rules, and only after a training session for any volunteers who wanted to help. I never saw Diane in the parking lot again. I heard she moved out a few months later. Someone in the group chat said she bought a condo in a building with no HOA. I did not care. She was gone. The rules were fixed, the fees were refunded, the management company was fired. The board published standards and timelines to all homeowners. My car never got towed. My parent finished recovery and went home. I kept working overtime, and the stress lifted. The neighborhood is quieter now. People still complain about the HOA, because that is what people do. But the complaints are normal things like landscaping schedules and clubhouse reservations. Nobody is getting shaken down. Nobody is getting booted. Nobody is afraid to have guests over. The group chat is still active, but it is mostly people sharing recipes and organizing block parties. The stack of pre-filled violation forms with boxes already checked is gone. The enforcement crew in vests is gone. The handheld scanner is gone. The tow truck does not prowl the streets anymore. I still keep the binder. I still have the folder on my desktop with all the screenshots and photos and receipts. I do not think I will ever delete it. It reminds me that even when the system is rigged, you can fight back if you have proof and you are willing to outlast them. Diane thought she could bury me with paperwork and fees and made-up rules. She thought nobody would call her out. She was wrong. I documented everything. I found allies. I waited for her to make the mistake that would flip the power dynamic. And when the moment came, I used it. I will see you in the next upload.